Today at 6, startling new figures on COVID infections in the UK. 1 in every 15 people were infected in the run-up to New Year's Eve. No more PCR tests after a positive lateral flow result in England and Wales if there are no symptoms, which could ease pressure on labs, but fears remain for hospitals.
Potentially of greatest concern, case rates are now rising rapidly among the older and more vulnerable, including doubling every week among those over 60, with the obvious risk that this will continue to increase the pressures on our NHS.
The isolation period in Scotland is coming down from 10 to 7 days in line with the rest of the UK. Also on the programme. Good news for winter travellers. Rules requiring a test before arrival in England are being scrapped.
It's a victory for anyone who wants to be on the right side of history.
4 people are cleared in Bristol of criminal damage after the toppling of a statue during a Black Lives Matter protest. Will he or won't he defend his Australian Open title? Novak Djokovic's appearance is in doubt after problems with his visa. And the first woman of colour, a British Army officer, makes the 700-mile solo trek to the South Pole.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, the series may be lost, but England battle hard on a rain-affected opening day of the 4th Ashes Test in Sydney.
Boundary off the first ball, wicket off the second.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Latest figures suggest 1 person in every 15 across the UK had COVID in the run-up to New Year's Eve, the highest level of infections recorded by the Office for National Statistics. But Boris Johnson's confirmed there'll be no new restrictions in England, saying the government was taking a balanced approach to COVID. The rules on testing are changing in England and Wales. Anyone who has a positive lateral flow test but no symptoms won't have to confirm the result with a PCR test. Our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, has the very latest.
2 years into this pandemic, and it can feel as if time is standing still. But ministers and medics insist progress has been made. Across the UK, governments are dealing with things differently.
Are you gambling with the NHS, Prime Minister?
Boris Johnson has imposed fewer restrictions than elsewhere. His plan B, more masks, COVID passports and working from home, will stay in place. In the Commons, he was bullish about the strategy.
Because of the balanced and the proportionate approach that we've taken to COVID. We've been able to keep this country open, keep our economy moving, more open than any other comparable economy in Europe. And they know it, Mr. Speaker.
With a huge rise in cases, the testing system has been under strain. So today, a change in England and Wales. If you don't have COVID symptoms and your lateral flow test is positive, you'll still have to isolate, but won't have to confirm the result with a PCR. Staff shortages, though, remain a major problem.
We're now short tonight.
In hospitals and other sectors, services are being cancelled or delayed because so many are in isolation. The Labour leader is one of them after testing positive for the 2nd time. His deputy stood in.
Doctors, nurses, carers, teachers and pupils can't get the tests they need now to do 2 tests a week. Emergency workers are reportedly stuck in isolation because they can't get their hands on a test. The government has been asleep at the wheel, Mr. Speaker, and the result is total shambles.
Before Christmas, the Prime Minister was under huge pressure after his own MPs defied him and he had to rely on Labour votes to get his COVID plans through. Boris Johnson is the kind of politician who instinctively prefers to let people make their own decisions. But even if he wanted to introduce tighter restrictions, that would mean another damaging fight with his own MPs. So for now, he's leaving things as they are, while admitting that parts of the NHS might feel overwhelmed. Today, Tory MPs were more supportive, but are now pushing for an exit plan.
It is not in the national interest to partially or wholly shut down sectors of our economy every time we see a new variant. So will my right honourable friend take this opportunity to inform the House as to whether and how the government will be changing its approach when new variants arrive?
We have got to have a plan to live with this virus like normal forever. When is he going to set that plan out?
For now, though, Mr Johnson is watching and waiting to see the full effects of this latest COVID wave. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the latest figures indicate a steep rise in infections across the UK. In the northwest of England, infection rates have doubled in a week and are running at 1 person in every 15 contracting COVID. That's about 8% of the population. Our correspondent Dominic Hughes has been finding out how local health authorities are coping.
Across the northwest of England, the Omicron variant is building.
We've got the CT on here.
Infections are spreading. And while it might be a relatively milder form of the virus, the numbers involved mean hospitals are feeling the pressure.
The rise in cases of Omicron is absolutely enormous. It's rising very, very rapidly indeed. I think what will probably happen is it will keep rising, but it will peak fairly soon, and our hope is that this lasts for more weeks rather than months.
The most recent data shows how fast Omicron has spread in the northwest of England. Just before Christmas, an estimated 3.2% of the population in the region had coronavirus, around 1 in 30 people. By New Year's Eve, that number had more than doubled to 7.8%, 1 in 15. January is always a really tough month for the health service, but as well as the usual winter pressures, there are now a growing number of COVID patients arriving at hospitals, as well as staff themselves falling sick or having to isolate because of the virus. And that's why the Royal Bolton is one of 17 hospitals across Greater Manchester where non-urgent surgery has been suspended. Staff absences aren't just affecting hospitals, but community nursing teams and care homes too.
Okay, you take care.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister talked of riding out this wave, but local leaders warn there will be some tough weeks ahead.
We believe we need to be more vigilant than that and, recognise that this month will present real challenges. That was the message we were getting from our experts this morning. It's going to be a very difficult month.
And as the virus spreads from its London epicentre, what's happening now in the northwest could well be seen right across the country.
Well, there are huge pressures across the health and care system wherever you look. And despite incredible and extraordinary effort at the front line, we have got patients who are waiting too long to have their 999 call answered. And also we've got people who are waiting too long to be seen in accident and emergency departments. We also know there's pressures in terms of people being able to access mental health services and community services.
With more sick patients and a growing number of absent staff, some hospitals are now approaching the limits of what counts as safe care. And that means taking some tough decisions on what they can and can't do. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Manchester.
Nicola Sturgeon has outlined the relaxation of the rules on self-isolation and testing, which brings Scotland into line with the rest of the UK. The First Minister says those with a positive result will now have the option to end self-isolation after 7 days rather than 10, as long as they have no fever and return 2 negative lateral flow tests. Fully vaccinated adults who are in the same household as someone with COVID no longer need to isolate as long as their lateral flow tests are negative every day for 7 days. Our Scotland correspondent Alexandra Mackenzie has the full details.
Another new term overshadowed by coronavirus as some children in Scotland returned to the classroom.
I thought they would put another lockdown on school. I did think that, and I was hoping that was going to happen.
I actually feel okay about it because we've had coronavirus a few months ago.
Up to a quarter of the staff were off at the Glasgow Gaelic School because of COVID.
It is going to cause some challenges. We are going to have to think about reorganising classes and having teachers cover for their absent colleagues.
At a virtual session of the Scottish Parliament, the First Minister said isolation rules would be relaxed from 10 days to 7 for those with COVID, dependent on negative tests. And household contacts can take lateral flow tests from midnight to night instead of isolating.
These changes are significant and they are not completely without risk. However, at this stage of the pandemic, they do strike an appropriate balance.
This comes after weeks of pressure from opposition parties. The First Minister previously said it would spread infection even further.
I also welcome the changes to self-isolation, which the Scottish Conservatives have been calling for since day one. When they were introduced, we said this policy was not sustainable. Every other part of the United Kingdom made the change, but Scotland was left as an outlier.
Hospitality has struggled with so many staff isolating. The announcement came as a welcome relief to many.
Common sense has prevailed, that has been reduced. The 10 days on its own was unsustainable. The last few weeks it's felt like you're almost being punished.
The Scottish Government said at least 1 in 20 of us now has coronavirus. The number of new cases recorded yesterday was more than 16,000. And in the last week, the number of people in hospital has almost doubled. As businesses prepare for the new rules, the First Minister warned this phase of the pandemic is possibly the most challenging so far. Alexandra Mackenzie, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, the government's latest coronavirus figures show there were just under 195,000 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, there were over 183,000 new cases reported per day in the last week. There were 17,276 people in hospital being treated with coronavirus as of yesterday. 334 deaths were reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. But that figure does include a backlog of hospital deaths reported overnight by NHS England, covering the period from the 1st to the 4th of January. On average, in the past week, 171 deaths were announced every day. On vaccinations, more than 34.5 million people have had a booster jab, which means more than 60% of people aged 12 and over have now had 3 vaccine doses. Now, rules requiring travellers to take a test before they arrive in England will be scrapped from 4 a.m. on Friday. They also won't have to isolate while waiting for a negative PCR result. From Sunday, travellers can take a lateral flow test no later than day 2 after they arrive, and if that's positive, they'll have to self-isolate and take a further PCR test to identify any new variants. Well, our transport correspondent Katie Austin is live at St Pancras International Station in London for us this evening. Katie, good news, some good news for travellers and for a beleaguered travel industry.
Yes, this marks a return to pre-Omicron arrangements, making international travel cheaper and easy again for fully vaccinated passengers. As you say, from 4 o'clock on Friday morning, they won't have to do a COVID test within 2 days of setting off for England, nor will they have to self-isolate while they await the result of their post-arrival test. And from Sunday morning, from 4 a.m. on Sunday morning, they won't have to take a PCR test within 2 days of arriving into England. They can take a lateral flow test instead, although that can't be a free NHS one. If they test positive, they must take a PCR, and that can be a free NHS test. Now, this has been welcomed by travel businesses who had said that the testing measures introduced to stem the spread of Omicron were holding back the sector's recovery. Firms are now feeling more optimistic, but the past couple of months have shown how quickly things can change, and a lot of other countries around the world have still got pretty stringent entry requirements in place. Also this evening, Wales has confirmed it will be following England's lead with these measures, but the Welsh Health Minister said they're doing it reluctantly.
OK, Katie, thank you for that. Katie Austin there, live at St Pancras in London. And across Europe, governments are struggling to contain the Omicron variant, leading to a record number of cases in some countries. Italy's government, which reported a record 189,000 COVID infections today, is meeting to discuss whether to make vaccines mandatory for all workers and the over 50s. And in France, President Macron used controversial language to say he wants to make life difficult for those who are unvaccinated. Our correspondent Mark Lowen reports now from Rome.
The youngest to be armed in the endless battle against COVID. 5-year-old Eduardo gets his first jab as Italy steps up vaccinations for children. Maybe too small to grasp how the pandemic has changed their world. But, say parents, they too must fight it.
Why did you want to vaccinate your son?
Because I love him, because his father and I really love him and want him and all his little friends to go back to a normal life. So this is the least we can do. Respect science and respect our children.
Com'è andata?
It was okay, says Eduardo.
Non ti sei fatta male?
Did it hurt? I asked. Just a little bit.
Pochino.
They do their best here to soften the experience with certificates of bravery, a rite of passage for the pandemic generation.
You can see the smile on their face when they ask to you, now I can see my friend, you can say yes, you can play with them and everything, because now the vaccine for COVID-19 is so important for everything.
When Italy became the first country in the West to fall to the virus in 2020, it was the first in the world to impose a nationwide lockdown. But today, despite record cases, its streets are once again busy, as it, like much of Europe, tightens vaccine rules instead, to some resistance.
C'est inadmissible!
In France, a heated debate in Parliament over mandatory vaccination for restaurants and trains was suspended amid opposition protests over an interview with President Macron. He told a newspaper he aimed to bar the unvaccinated from social activities, using the slang word emmerder, or to piss them off. On the streets of Paris, mixed views on the colourful language.
To piss people off, I think that's a bit out of place for a president to say.
The message is that he wants to improve things, but his form of words wasn't great.
At the vaccine centre, they're ramping up shots before schools resume next week, hoping to stem the Omicron surge. Among the messages, my biggest dream is that COVID ends. Sometimes children just put it best. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Rome.
Here, as we've been hearing, more than 3.7 million people in the UK tested positive for coronavirus in the week ending the 31st of December. That's according to figures from the Office for National Statistics. Now, the infection rate increased in all the home nations. In England, it was 1 in 15. In Wales, 1 in 20, with the same rate in Scotland. In Northern Ireland, it was 1 in 25. Now, all the figures are the highest recorded by the ONS since its survey began. Well, let's get more analysis from our health editor, Hugh Pym. Hugh, stark rises in the numbers. Clearly, this thing is continuing to spread. And I suppose the question is, how do we deal with it?
Well, Clive, yes, startling figures. 3.7 million people in the UK with the virus at the end of the year, December the 31st, compared with 2.3 million just a week before, just illustrating how fast it is spreading. And in different parts of the UK, slightly better news in London, slowing growth. Of course, that was the epicentre, but much faster growth in the north of England and Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And just illustrating that the scale of Omicron and how rapidly it's getting around in different communities well beyond London. Now, hospital admissions, they're growing fast as well, up 60% week on week, though still only half of where they were this time last year. And I think that's why the government are putting a lot of emphasis on the boosters. Vaccination is having an impact. The latest death figures, 334, that was quite a shocking figure on the face of it. It does reflect, though, the delayed reporting, certainly in England, over days previous to that.
Sure. OK, Hugh, many thanks. Hugh Pym. And with pressure on hospitals growing, the BBC has launched a special NHS tracker offering information on how your local services are coping. It'll run throughout the winter and includes the latest data on emergency treatment, waiting times, where you live. 19 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. And there are startling new figures on COVID infections in the UK. 1 in every 15 people were infected in the run-up to New Year's Eve. And how pressures on the social care system making it harder for disabled adults to live independent lives.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News channel, Novak Djokovic's entry to Melbourne has been delayed over an issue with his visa after the world number one was granted an exemption from vaccination rules to play at the Australian Open.
Now, 4 people have been cleared of criminal damage over toppling the statue of a slave trader during a Black Lives Matter protest in Bristol. Rhiann Graham, Milo Ponsford, Sage Willoughby and Jake Scoos were charged after the monument to Edward Colston was brought down in June 2020, but they were found not guilty at Bristol Crown Court. This report from Andrew Plant contains some flashing images.
Emerging from court after weeks on trial. Nicknamed the Colston Four, now found not guilty of criminal damage.
We just want to say thank you to so many people, because we have never been alone in this journey. So many people reverberating across the world in response to it. And one thing that we know now is that Colston does not represent Bristol.
It was June the 7th, 2020. During a Black Lives Matter protest, the statue of slave trader Edward Colston tied up and toppled. The 125-year-old bronze sprayed with graffiti and rolled into the water of the harbour nearby.
This has been a case like no other in terms of that complete polarisation of public opinion.
Edward Colston made his fortune in the transatlantic slave trade. Across the city, buildings, pubs, streets and schools carried his name. The protest made headlines worldwide. Many venues began dropping the Colston name. Conversations began about statues and monuments elsewhere.
It's not about the statue, it's really about the story that we tell of ourselves, the heroes that we lionise and those that we now wish to perhaps move away from.
3 cheers for the Colston Four!
Found not guilty, defence lawyers today said the court case should never have happened and said the defendants had played a small part in the fight against racism.
Andrew Plant reporting for us from Bristol there. Now, the men's world #1 tennis player Novak Djokovic's entry into Australia has been delayed over an issue with his visa. Now, he arrived in Melbourne this afternoon for the Australian Open after being granted a controversial medical exemption from vaccination rules. But the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, is demanding Djokovic prove he has a genuine medical reason or he'll be on the next plane home. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks has that story.
Last year's trip to Melbourne involved yet another Grand Slam and a barefoot walk. This time, Djokovic swapped beaches for border control. After a 14-hour flight, Djokovic was stuck in Melbourne airport after applying for the wrong visa. Hours later, the situation is still ongoing. The Sports Minister for the state of Victoria confirmed it wouldn't support his visa application. Earlier, the minister had denied Djokovic had been given special treatment.
Novak isn't coming to play at the Australian Open because he's, the biggest tennis star of them all. He's coming because he has been able to demonstrate through this process that he has an eligibility under the rules that apply to everybody else in the country.
Djokovic has never said he's unvaccinated, but is on record as being opposed to the jab. He's by far the highest profile of the handful of players granted medical exemptions to play in Melbourne. No reasons have been given, but it could include Djokovic having recently tested positive for the virus again. Before the player landed, the Prime Minister made his feelings clear.
We await his presentation and what evidence he provides to support that. If that evidence is insufficient, then he won't be treated any different to anyone else and he'll be on the next plane home. So there should be no special rules for Novak Djokovic at all, none whatsoever.
Melbourne residents have experienced some of the toughest COVID restrictions in the world. It's clear they're in no mood to extend that famous warm Aussie welcome to the world #1.
He shouldn't be allowed to come. It's his choice not to be vaccinated, which is fine, and I think the government here has made the choice that you should be vaccinated.
I guess he might even get booed when he gets up onto the court.
We have someone that's come from overseas and all of a sudden he's been exempt and can play, and I think it's an absolute disgrace and I won't be watching it.
There's a big incentive for Djokovic to play in Melbourne. Another win would move him clear of Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer with a record 21 Grand Slams. The greatest ever then, just perhaps not with Australians. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
Just under half the budget for social care is spent on supporting disabled adults of working age. But the system is under intense pressure, with increased demand for services and a shortage of carers. It means some people aren't getting the support they need to live independent lives, as Paul Carter's been finding out.
Oh, thank you.
Suzanne likes to go out,
And then we can party the whole night through, which will make a change.
but an evening trip to the pub with her partner Jason is a rare occasion. Drink?
Realistically, if we were going out for a meal or drink, we'd probably have to leave by about 6:30 to make sure we were home in time.
Her disability means that she needs help getting into bed. She has an evening call from a care agency, but the time of this can sometimes be unpredictable and can be as early as 7:30.
Going to bed at 7:30 is just way too early for me personally. You know, I'm only in my mid-40s, and unless you're absolutely exhausted, who goes to bed at 7:30 at night? It really does seem like a loss of control. You are completely at the mercy of the situation you're in with the carers.
Hi Stella, you alright? I'm okay, what about you?
Jennifer also needs help in the morning and evening. That often means long shifts for her carers, like Stella.
Ready, go.
Normally I start at 7:30. I have to leave early. Finish, it depends. If I have to come to Jennifer, I finish like 8:30.
You two, see you in the morning.
There must be times where it's 7:30 in the evening and you think, oh, I just don't want to go to bed right now.
It's difficult, but I don't want my carers then going to bed at midnight because they're coming here at 11 to help me to bed. They're doing these long days, and I'd like to see them doing a shift system.
The agency that provides Jennifer's care says that the way the funding of the current system is structured limits the shifts they can provide.
It will be possible if the contracts that we have with the authorities, NHS or social services or private clients, allow you to give an extra allowance for those who want a late call.
Is it basically just it needs more money?
It is money, yes, yes.
Hello, gorgeous.
With the care industry facing multiple challenges around staffing and funding, the government have recently announced an additional £5.4 billion of funding for social care over the next 3 years.
Good girl.
Suzanne's hope is that if some of those pressures are relieved, she'll be able to extend her days out to more nights out.
Okay.
Paul Carter, BBC News.
The fourth Ashes test in Sydney is evenly poised, with England's bowlers making some headway. Stuart Broad on his recall took the wicket of David Warner, leaving Australia at the close of day one on 126 for 3. England trail in the 5-test series 3-0. A British Army officer has become the first woman of colour to complete a solo expedition to the South Pole. Captain Preet Chandy, who's 32, trekked 700 miles in 40 days, pulling all her equipment on a sledge. She faced temperatures of minus 45 degrees Celsius and said she wanted to encourage people to push boundaries and believe in themselves. Our correspondent Phil Mackey has her story.
This was the moment Preet Chandy made it to the South Pole. She braved 60-mile-an-hour winds while pulling a 90-kilogram sled, averaging 17 miles a day. After her grueling 40-day trek, she posted this message on her blog.
I made it to the South Pole where it's snowing, feeling so many emotions right now.
The preparations weren't exactly easy either. She spent 27 days alone in Greenland to prepare for the extreme conditions. Before she left, Polar Preet, as she's become known, said she wanted to inspire others.
As a woman of colour, as an Asian woman, when people see me doing this, again, the image, they don't expect to see, they're so excited. And it's just, people have said to me that I'm such a role model just for them to see somebody that looks, slightly like them.
The trip cost £100,000. The fundraising was organised by a charity called Team Army.
I got the sense of her tenacity, her ambition, her drive. And I thought, oh my God, I just have to help you.
What do you think now she's achieved it?
She has been amazing, absolutely exceeded everyone's expectations.
She reached the pole 5 days quicker than was expected, despite sickness and exhaustion, all of which melted away with the elation of achieving her goal.
You are capable of anything you want, no matter where you are from, where your start line is. Everybody starts somewhere. I don't want to just break the glass ceiling. I want to smash it into a million pieces.
Preet has got used to the solitude, which is a good job, because an outbreak of COVID means the flight crew that will bring her back is stuck in isolation. Phil Mackey, BBC News.
It's a damn sight warmer here. Just. Matt Taylor.
It is. We've had the air from the Arctic, though. Never mind the Antarctica. But it's led to beautiful conditions like this in the Peak District today. Vast majority of the UK seeing similar sort of weather, but we're about to pay the price through tonight. It's a night to take a deeper snuggle into the duvet because a widespread frost and sharp frost is expected across the country. Just take a look at the temperatures in the major towns and city centres into tomorrow morning's rush hour, all below freezing. But if you go into the countryside, we could be as low as -7, -8 tonight. Rural England, maybe -9, -10 in the northeast of Scotland. Temporarily frosty in Northern Ireland, but that will change quite quickly later in the night as these weather fronts push in, bringing wet, windy weather to all at some point through the day, preceded by some snow. But there is a slice of slightly milder air, which will turn some of that snow back to rain for a time. But the colder air is back later in the day. So for tomorrow, bright, frosty start for many, but wet, windy morning in Northern Ireland. Widespread gales also developing around the western portion of the UK. Snow blowing around the hills in Scotland, on the Pennines, also Lake District Fells for a time. Turning back to sunshine and showers in the west later. That rain pushing eastwards on those strong winds. I said there's a slice of milder air in there. You're not going to feel it in the strength of the wind. The rain not reaching East Anglia in the southeast until end of the afternoon, evening rush hour. But then once that clears, it's back to clear spells and wintry showers, particularly in western areas, which will continue through the night and into Friday morning. A chilly, locally frosty start. Sunshine and showers. Showers most frequent in the west of Scotland, northwest England. Some southern eastern areas will stay dry. Temperatures around 3 to 8 Celsius, but it will feel cold in that in the strength of what will be another blustery day. But our weather's flip-flopping at the moment because it's back to cloud and rain for Saturday. This weather system, though, slightly broader than the one that will be with us tomorrow, so the rain longer lasting, slightly milder air to come with it, strongest winds in the south, but it does clear through. Bright, frosty start to Sunday before more rain arrives in the west. Clive.
OK, Matt, many thanks. Matt Taylor there. And a reminder of our top story this evening. Startling new figures on COVID infections in the UK show 1 in every 15 people were infected in the run-up to New Year's Eve. That's it. I'll be back with the news at 10. Now, though, on BBC One, time for the news where you are. Have a very good evening.